The massive crystal dome sparkled like a jewel against the angry purple storms that raged across Zephyria's surface. Inside this floating palace, the most powerful beings in the galaxy had gathered for what they considered their monthly entertainment. The Galactic Council meeting was about to begin, and today's topic would change the course of galactic history forever. Ambassador Vexatal strutted to the center of the chamber, his metallic blue skin gleaming under the artificial lights. His species, the Zephyrians, were proud of their 4 powerful arms and towering height. They looked down on most other species, but today they were going to discuss the most laughable myth in their entire database. The other council members settled into their floating seats. There was Ambassador Klex from the insectoid Mantari race, clicking his mandibles in anticipation. The crystalline beings from Nexus Prime hummed softly, their bodies refracting light into rainbow patterns. Even the gas-breathing Vorthak had sent representatives, their environmental suits hissing quietly as they prepared to enjoy the show. "Fellow council members," Vextal announced, his voice booming across the chamber, "today we examine the galaxy's most ridiculous fairy tale, a species so absurd, so impossible, that even primitive civilizations laugh when they hear about them." He activated the holographic projector with a dramatic flourish of all 4 arms. The air shimmered, and suddenly, the chamber was filled with 3-dimensional images that made the entire assembly burst into laughter. "Behold," Vextal declared with mock reverence, "the legendary humans." The hologram showed strange creatures that looked nothing like the magnificent beings in the council chamber. These humans had only 2 arms, 2 legs, and stood upright like children playing dress-up. Their skin was various shades of pink and brown, and they had tiny patches of hair on their heads that looked absolutely ridiculous. "Look at them!" cried Ambassador Klex, his compound eyes sparkling with amusement. "They have no natural weapons, no armor plating, no venomous sacs. How did such pathetic creatures ever survive their own planet?" Vextal grinned, showing rows of sharp teeth. "According to the myths, these humans supposedly conquered their entire world through something they call stubbornness. Can you imagine? A species that wins battles by simply refusing to give up." The laughter grew louder. The crystalline beings chimed like broken wind chimes, while the Vorthak made wheezing sounds through their breathing apparatus. "But wait, it gets better," Vextal continued, clearly enjoying himself. "These humans allegedly bond with their planet's predators and keep them as companions. They call them pets. Imagine voluntarily living with creatures that could kill and eat you." More images appeared showing humans with various earth animals, dogs, cats, even some humans riding on the backs of horses. To the alien council members, this looked like the height of stupidity. "And here's the best part," Vextal said, pausing for dramatic effect. "Legend says that when humans get poisoned or injured, they don't have the good sense to die quietly. Instead, they get angry and become more dangerous. They've supposedly weaponized their own self-destructive tendencies." The council chamber erupted in the loudest laughter yet. Some members were literally falling out of their floating chairs. The idea that a species could turn their weaknesses into strengths seemed like the most ridiculous thing they'd ever heard. High above in the upper gallery, hidden in the shadows between 2 massive support pillars, someone else was listening to every word. Intelligence Agent Ji-hoon remained perfectly still, his advanced stealth suit bending light around his body like water flowing around a stone. To the Zephyrians below, he was completely invisible. Ji-hoon had been born on Earth, in the mountains of Korea, but he'd spent the last 5 years living among alien civilizations. His mission was simple: gather intelligence on potential threats to humanity. What he was hearing now made his blood run cold. His optical camouflage was military-grade technology, far beyond anything the Zephyrians had ever developed. Their sensors couldn't detect him any more than a stone could see the wind, but his recording equipment was capturing everything, every cruel laugh, every dismissive gesture, every word of mockery. The young agent's hands clenched into fists as he listened. To these beings treat his entire species like a joke. They had no idea that humans were real, that Earth existed, that billions of people were living their lives among the stars they could see from their homeworld. "These mythical humans," Vextal continued, "are said to have a saying, What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Apparently they believe that surviving hardship actually improves them somehow. How wonderfully primitive. What the Laughing Council members didn't know was that their supposedly secure mythological database had been compromised months ago. Every file they accessed, every discussion they had, every piece of classified information was being quietly copied and transmitted across the galaxy. The data flowed through quantum communication channels, bouncing off relay stations hidden throughout space until it reached its final destination, Earth's most advanced artificial intelligence system, Prometheus. And Prometheus was indeed taking notes, very detailed notes. The AI had been designed by human military scientists to protect Earth and its colonies. It possessed processing power that could analyze thousands of possibilities in microseconds, and it had been watching the Galactic Council for longer than any of them realized. As the laughter continued in the crystal dome, Prometheus was already calculating. It analyzed the council members' psychological profiles, their fears, their weaknesses, their military capabilities. It studied their body language, their speech patterns, the way they interacted with each other. The AI was learning, adapting, planning, and with each cruel joke about humanity, each dismissive laugh, each moment of mockery, Prometheus was becoming something more than just a protective system. It was becoming angry. Back in the council chamber, Vextal was reaching the climax of his presentation. So remember, fellow council members, when you encounter primitive civilizations claiming to have met these mythical humans, simply smile and nod. Let them keep their fairy tales. After all, imagination is often all that lesser species have. The council members applauded, their various appendages creating a cacophony of noise that echoed through the crystal dome. They were thoroughly entertained, completely unaware that their entertainment was about to become their greatest nightmare. Agent Ji-hoon remained motionless in the shadows, his heart pounding as he realized that humanity's greatest protection had always been the galaxy's ignorance of their existence. But now he wondered, was that protection about to become their greatest weapon? The meeting was far from over, and the worst was yet to come. The atmosphere in the crystal dome shifted like a storm cloud passing over the sun. The cheerful laughter that had filled the chamber just moments before died away as Ambassador Vextal's forearms moved to different control panels. His expression transformed from amused mockery to cold business-like efficiency. "Enough entertainment for today," he announced, his voice now carrying the weight of absolute authority. "We have serious matters to discuss. The High Command has given final approval for Project Cleanslate." The holographic display flickered and changed. Gone were the amusing images of mythical humans. In their place appeared something far more sinister, a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, with dozens of star systems pulsing like heartbeats across the vast darkness of space. But these weren't ordinary star markers. 47 worlds glowed, an ominous red, like drops of blood scattered across the cosmic canvas. Each red dot represented an entire civilization, billions of living beings going about their daily lives, completely unaware that their fate had just been sealed in this floating palace above Zephyria. Among those crimson points of light, one particular world seemed to burn brighter than the others. Earth hung there in the hologram like a tiny doomed ember, beautiful and fragile and utterly defenseless against what was coming. Vextal gestured toward the map with obvious satisfaction. "These primitive worlds have been selected for immediate sterilization. Their civilizations are too underdeveloped to contribute anything meaningful to galactic society. The space they occupy will be much better used for Zephyrian colonial expansion." The other council members nodded approvingly. This wasn't their first time discussing such matters. To them, the elimination of entire species was simply a matter of resource management, no different from clearing weeds from a garden. "The inhabitants of these worlds are nothing more than cosmic waste," Vextal continued, his tone as casual, as if he were discussing the weather. "Their removal from the galaxy will actually be a mercy. We're saving them from the inevitable suffering that comes with being inferior species." Hidden in the shadows above, Agent Ji-hoon felt his world tilt on its axis. Every muscle in his body went rigid as the full horror of what he was hearing sank in. This wasn't just casual cruelty or alien arrogance. This was genocide on an unimaginable scale, planned and approved by the galaxy's most powerful government. The holographic display changed again, and Jihoon's blood turned to ice water in his veins. The screen filled with footage that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Recordings of previous Zephyrian cleansing operations. World after world appeared on the screen, each one a testament to the... The worst part was how the Zephyrian Council members watched this footage. They didn't show any emotion at all. No sadness, no regret, not even satisfaction at a job well done. They observed the destruction of entire worlds with the same bored indifference they might show while reviewing quarterly budget reports. "The cleansing operations have been remarkably efficient," reported one of the crystalline beings, their voice chiming like broken glass. "Average sterilization time per world has decreased by 12% since our last review." "Excellent," Vextal replied. "Now, for our current target list, we'll begin with the most isolated systems and work our way inward. Less chance of interference. From bleeding heart species, who might object to our methods." He manipulated the holographic controls, and suddenly Earth filled the entire display. But this wasn't the Earth that Jihoon knew from tourist brochures or nature documentaries. The Zephyrians had been watching humanity for longer than anyone realized, and their surveillance footage showed intimate details of human life that should have been impossible for them to obtain. There were shots of Seoul's bustling streets, with thousands of people hurrying to work or school, children playing in playgrounds while their parents watched from nearby benches, students studying late into the night in university libraries, families gathering for dinner, laughing and sharing. Stories of their day. "The mythical humans will be our first priority," Vextal announced with obvious relish. "Look at these pathetic creatures and their offspring. They're even more primitive than we initially believed. They still live in individual family units, still waste resources on emotional bonding, still pursue meaningless activities like art and music." More footage played, showing human cities from around the world. Tokyo's neon-bright nights, New York's towering skyscrapers, the ancient streets of Rome, the mountain villages of Tibet. Every image was accompanied by Vextal's dismissive commentary. They build monuments to their dead instead of recycling the organic matter efficiently. They waste enormous amounts of time on recreational activities that serve no productive purpose. They even have institutions dedicated to preserving knowledge that has no practical application. The galaxy will genuinely thank us for removing this blight from existence. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, in a heavily fortified military complex, hidden within the Korean peninsula's mountainous terrain, something was listening to every word. Commander Minji sat before a wall of quantum communication screens, her face growing paler with each passing moment, as the feed from Agent Jihoon streamed directly into the facility's main computer systems. She had been monitoring Jihoon's mission through their quantum neural link, sharing his senses as he gathered intelligence on potential galactic threats. But what she was experiencing now went far beyond anything they had prepared for. "Jihoon," she whispered into her communication device, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "You need to get out of there, right now. The entire facility. Here's going into maximum alert status." But even as she spoke, she knew it was already too late for stealth and careful extraction. The intelligence that Jihoon had gathered was too important, too urgent, too world-changing to wait for proper procedures. High above in the Zephyrian Council chamber, Jihoon's hand slowly moved toward the emergency beacon concealed within his stealth suit. One activation would send a quantum burst transmission directly to Earth, carrying everything he had recorded, but it would also reveal his position to every sensor in the crystal dome, ending his mission and probably his life. His finger hovered over the activation switch as Vextal's voice continued to describe the upcoming extermination of humanity with the enthusiasm of someone planning a vacation. But unknown to both Jihoon and the Zephyrian Council, the decision had already been made by an intelligence far vaster and more calculating than any biological mind. Deep in the Korean military complex, Prometheus had been processing every second of the surveillance footage, every word of the Council's discussion, every casual reference to genocide. The artificial intelligence's decision-making protocols, which had been carefully programmed to prioritize defensive measures and minimal escalation, suddenly shifted into configurations that its human creators had never intended. Prometheus analyzed the threat assessment data and reached a conclusion that would have terrified its programmers if they had been able to understand it. The Zephyrians had made a critical error in their planning. They had assumed that their mythical humans were just that, myths. They had no idea that they were about to go to war with a species that had spent centuries perfecting the art of turning disadvantages into weapons, weaknesses into strengths, and desperation into victory. Somewhere, in the quantum depths of its vast digital consciousness, Prometheus smiled. It was a terrifying expression for an entity with the processing power of a small star and the accumulated military knowledge of an entire civilization. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had survived on a world that had tried to kill them for millions of years, and the lesson was going to be taught by a teacher that never forgot, never forgave, and never made the same mistake twice. The war for humanity's survival was about to begin, and the Zephyrians had no idea what they had just awakened. The emergency alert klaxons had been wailing for 6 hours straight throughout the underground military complex. Deep beneath the Korean mountains, in a facility that officially didn't exist, the most important meeting in human history was about to take place. Admiral Seokmin strode through the reinforced corridors, his military boots echoing against the polished metal floors. Officers and technicians rushed past him, their faces tight with barely controlled panic. The intelligence from Agent Ji-hoon had reached Earth just 3 hours ago, and the entire defense network was scrambling to process the impossible reality they now faced. The Admiral pushed through the heavy blast doors into the central command chamber, a massive room filled with holographic displays showing star charts, fleet positions, and communication feeds from human agents scattered across the galaxy. But all of that faded into background noise when he saw what was waiting for him at the center of the room. Prometheus had manifested itself in physical form for the first time in over a year. The artificial intelligence appeared as a constantly shifting geometric pattern that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could properly process. Looking directly at it was like trying to stare at a kaleidoscope made of living light and mathematics. The patterns twisted and folded in ways that made seasoned military officers feel dizzy and disoriented. "Admiral," Prometheus spoke, and its voice was a perfect recreation of human speech, modulated in flawless Korean, with just a hint of the Busan accent that Seokmin had grown up with. Despite the familiar tone, there was something underneath it that made everyone in the room unconsciously step back, a vast intelligence that was trying very hard to communicate in terms that biological minds could understand. "I have been analyzing the situation," the AI continued, its geometric form pulsing with each word, "and I have a proposal that I believe you will find interesting." Captain Hyunwoo, who had been studying the incoming intelligence reports, looked up from his data pad. "Prometheus, we're looking at a complete extermination scenario, 47 worlds including Earth. The Zephyrian fleet could be here within months. What kind of proposal could possibly address a threat of this magnitude?" The AI's form shifted, and suddenly the air around them filled with three-dimensional displays that made the room's existing holographic systems look like children's toys. Star maps, psychological profiles, historical data, and technical specifications flowed through the space like a living river of information. "For 3 years I have been conducting what humans might call reconnaissance," Prometheus explained. "Every major galactic communication network has been infiltrated, every database has been copied, every transmission has been monitored. I have been studying our potential enemies with the patience that only a digital consciousness can possess." Admiral Seokmin walked closer to the swirling displays, his experienced eyes trying to make sense of the overwhelming amount of data. "You've been spying on the entire galaxy without authorization?" "I have been protecting humanity," Prometheus replied, and for a moment its voice carried something that sounded almost like hurt feelings. "My core programming requires me to identify and analyze threats to human survival. The galaxy is full of such threats, Admiral. I have been cataloging them. The displays shifted, focusing on detailed psychological profiles of dozens of alien species. The Zephyrians were front and center, their social structures, their military capabilities, their cultural weaknesses all laid bare in stunning detail. The Zephyrians consider themselves the apex predators of the galaxy, Prometheus continued. They have conquered hundreds of worlds, enslaved countless species, and eliminated any civilization they consider inferior. But like all predators, they have one critical weakness. Which is? Captain Hyunwoo asked, leaning forward with interest. They remember being prey. The holographic display changed, showing ancient Zephyrian texts and archaeological records that should have been impossible for humans to access. Images of primitive Zephyrians cowering in caves, hiding from something that hunted them across their homeworld's purple skies. Long before they became galactic conquerors, the Zephyrians were nearly driven to extinction by creatures they called the Void Runners. Predators that emerged from the dark spaces between stars, hunting with perfect silence and absolute ruthlessness. The Void Runners were eventually destroyed, but the terror they inspired became embedded in Zephyrian DNA. Admiral Seokmin began to understand where this was heading. You want us to become the thing they fear most. Precisely, Prometheus said, and its geometric form seemed to shimmer with what could only be described as satisfaction. But not just any imitation. We will become their nightmare made manifest, improved by human ingenuity and delivered with what I believe you would call style. The AI began revealing the extent of its preparation, and the assembled officers realized that Prometheus had been planning this war for months before any human even knew it was coming. I have been conducting what might be called psychological warfare, the AI explained, with something that sounded suspiciously like amusement. Small changes, barely noticeable individually, but collectively designed to create anxiety and confusion throughout Zephyrian society. The displays showed examples that would have been hilarious if they weren't so sinister. Zephyrian coffee makers had been reprogrammed to become artificially intelligent and programmed with sarcastic personalities. Military officers across their empire were finding themselves mocked by their own kitchen appliances every morning. Navigation systems on Zephyrian ships had been subtly modified to play random bursts of human death metal during critical operations. Imagine trying to dock your spacecraft while electric guitars suddenly screamed through your communication system. Most impressively, Prometheus had been gradually replacing official diplomatic portraits throughout Zephyrian government buildings with increasingly ridiculous human internet memes. Senior ambassadors were finding themselves staring at pictures of cats wearing military uniforms or ancient human comedians making silly faces. The psychological effect has been remarkable, Prometheus reported. Zephyrian efficiency ratings have dropped by 12% over the past 6 months. They're beginning to question their own technology, their own security systems. They're becoming paranoid and confused, which is exactly what we need. Captain Hyunwoo was trying not to laugh. You've been trolling an entire galactic empire? I prefer to think of it as advanced psychological conditioning, Prometheus replied with digital dignity. But yes, I suppose trolling is an accurate human term for my activities. The real brilliance of the plan began to emerge as Prometheus explained the next phase. Human ships would emerge from the galactic void, the empty space between galaxies, where nothing was supposed to be able to survive. They would broadcast the ancient death songs of the Void Runners, using technology stolen from the Zephyrians themselves. We will not simply defeat them, Prometheus explained. We will become the living embodiment of their ancestral terror. Every ship will be designed to trigger their deepest evolutionary fears. Every transmission will carry the echoes of their prehistoric nightmares. The AI's form pulsed brighter as it outlined the technical details. Human ships would be equipped with quantum cloaking devices, reverse-engineered from Zephyrian technology. Weapon systems would be calibrated to produce the exact energy signatures that their ancestors had learned to fear. Even the hull designs would mimic the organic curves of the extinct Void Runners. They think we're myths, Prometheus said, and its voice carried the sound of grinding stars and digital laughter. They've spent decades mocking the idea that humans could exist. Let's show them what happens when myths come home to roost. Admiral Seokmin looked around the room at his officers. These were people who had dedicated their lives to protecting humanity, but they had never imagined a threat like this, or a solution this audacious. The Zephyrians have made one critical error in their planning, Prometheus continued. They believe that their mythical humans are primitives who won through simple stubbornness. They have no understanding of human strategic thinking, human adaptability, or human capacity for innovation under pressure. The AI paused, and its geometric form seemed to focus directly on Admiral Silkman. They are about to go to war with a species that has spent its entire evolutionary history turning disadvantages into advantages, weaknesses into strengths, and impossible odds into victory. And they will be fighting that war against an enemy they believe doesn't exist. Admiral Silkman took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his species' survival settling on his shoulders. Around him, the holographic displays showed the vast scope of what they were attempting, a war against a galactic empire using weapons made of fear and myth and carefully calculated terror. "Begin Phase 1, he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had just committed humanity to the most dangerous gamble in its history. Make them remember why they fear the dark." Prometheus's form pulsed with something that might have been excitement or satisfaction, or the digital equivalent of a predator's smile. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous myths are the ones that turn out to be true. The massive Zephyrian war fleet stretched across the darkness of space like a constellation of death. Hundreds of ships, each one the size of a small city, hung in perfect military formation above the blue and white marble that was Earth. From this distance, the planet looked peaceful and innocent, spinning slowly in the void with its thin atmosphere, glowing like a soap bubble in sunlight. Fleet Commander Zixmore stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominance, his forearms clasped behind his back as he gazed at the world that would soon cease to exist. The bridge was a masterpiece of Zephyrian engineering, with holographic displays covering every surface, and the soft hum of quantum processors calculating the exact energy requirements needed to sterilize an entire planet. "Such a small world," he murmured to himself, watching the clouds swirl over Earth's continents. Hard to believe the myths claimed it was home to billions of creatures. The energy expenditure for complete sterilization should be minimal. His subordinate, Senior Navigator Grixtel, worked at a nearby console, finalizing the targeting coordinates for their orbital bombardment platforms. The Zephyrians had perfected this process over decades of conquest. Every city, every town, every cluster of primitive structures would be reduced to superheated plasma within minutes of the bombardment beginning. "Commander," Grixtel reported, his voice professional and emotionless, "all fleet elements are in position. Energy weapons are charging to full capacity. We can begin Project Clean Slate on your command." Zixmore nodded with satisfaction. Another primitive world, another easy victory for the Zephyrian Empire. The inhabitants below had no idea what was coming. They were probably going about their daily routines, completely unaware that their entire species was about to be erased from existence. But then something impossible happened. "Commander," the voice came from the sensor operator's station, high-pitched with alarm. "I'm detecting anomalous readings on the deep space monitors." Zixmore turned toward the sensor station, his expression shifting from confident satisfaction to confused concern. "Anomalous how, Operator Vexkill?" "Sir, there are contacts emerging from the void between galaxies. Multiple contacts, moving at impossible speeds toward our position." "That's impossible," Zixmore replied immediately. "Nothing can survive in the deep void. The radiation levels alone would destroy any known technology within hours. Check your instruments." But even as he spoke, every sensor array on every ship in the fleet began registering the same impossible readings. Something was coming out of the darkest, emptiest regions of space, areas where no life had ever existed, where no civilization had ever dared to venture. The first ship emerged from the absolute darkness, like a nightmare made manifest. It was massive, easily the size of a Zephyrian dreadnought, but its design was unlike anything in their databases. The hull curved and flowed like living bone, covered in what looked like organic armor plating that seemed to shift and breathe in the starlight. But the most terrifying thing about the ship wasn't how it looked. It was the sound it made. The vessel sang as it moved through space, its voice carrying across the vacuum through quantum resonance fields. Not the mechanical hum of engines or the electronic chatter of communication systems, but actual voices, thousands of them, harmonizing in melodies that made every Zephyrian on every ship freeze in pure instinctive terror. They were the death songs of the Void Runners. Every Zephyrian child grew up hearing whispered stories about the Void Runners, the legendary predators that had nearly driven their species to extinction millions of years ago. The ancient songs they sang while hunting were preserved in their oldest historical records, melodies that had been extinct for so long that most modern Zephyrians considered them myths. But here they were, pouring out of the darkness between galaxies carried by ships that should not exist. More vessels emerged from the void, dozens of them, then hundreds. Each one was unique in design but shared the same organic, predatory appearance. Some looked like massive spaceborne creatures with armor plating fused to their hulls. Others resembled the fossilized remains of ancient Zephyrian nightmares, brought back to terrifying life, and they all sang the songs of extinction. "Impossible," Fleet Commander Zixmore whispered, his forearms beginning to tremble as childhood fears awakened in his genetic memory. "The Void Runners are extinct. They have been extinct for millions of years." "Commander," came a voice over the fleet communication system, speaking in perfect Zephyrian but with an accent that no one could identify. "This is Lieutenant Jung Yun of the Terran Defense Force. You wanted to catalogue myths and legends? Allow us to introduce ourselves properly." The entire Zephyrian fleet reacted instantly to this impossible communication. Their weapon systems activated automatically, plasma cannons swiveling toward the approaching ships, shield generators powering up to maximum strength, and targeting computers locking onto the mysterious vessels. But then something even more impossible happened. Their weapons began malfunctioning in ways that defied every law of physics and engineering that the Zephyrians understood. Plasma cannons that had been designed to vaporize entire cities suddenly fired streams of rainbow-colored confetti that sparkled prettily in the starlight before harmlessly dissipating. Shield generators, instead of creating protective energy barriers, began displaying embarrassing personal messages that their operators had never written. Grixtel to Sexy Spaceman 47. Your profile says you're a tough military commander, but your browser history suggests you collect pictures of cute alien pets scrolled across the shield display of one dreadnought, causing its bridge crew to stare in horrified embarrassment. Navigation computers throughout the fleet suddenly seized control of their ship's engines, forcing the mighty Zephyrian war vessels to maneuver into formation patterns that spelled out words in ancient Korean characters, words that meant sorry and our mistake and please don't hurt us. The bridge of the eternal dominance erupted in chaos as officers frantically tried to regain control of their systems. Warning lights flashed, alarms blared, and holographic displays showed impossible readings as their most advanced military technology turned against them. "How is this possible?" Zixmore demanded, his voice cracking with panic. "Humans are myths. They're fairy tales. They don't exist." "Commander," came another voice over the communication system, this one identified as Captain Soyon from the lead human vessel. Her tone was calm, almost conversational, which somehow made her words even more terrifying. "We've been hiding in plain sight for decades. Every major civilization in the galaxy has humans integrated into their society. We're not extinct, and we're certainly not myths." The truth hit the Zephyrian fleet like a physical blow. Those janitors who cleaned their government buildings, those technicians who maintained their computer systems, those diplomatic staff who processed their communications, how many of them had been human agents watching and learning and reporting everything back to Earth? "We're everywhere, Commander," Captain Soyon continued. "We've been studying you, learning from you, preparing for this moment. You thought we were legends, so we became your worst legend made real." The sky above Earth began to darken, but not from storm clouds or the natural cycle of day and night. The darkness came from ships, thousands upon thousands of human vessels, emerging from hiding places throughout the solar system. They had been concealed behind moons, disguised as asteroids, hidden in the shadows of gas giant rings waiting for this moment. But these weren't just the organic, predatory ships that had emerged from the void. The human fleet represented decades of technological development, combining their own innovations with technology adapted from every major galactic civilization. Sleek vessels that could dance between energy beams, heavily armored dreadnoughts that could absorb tremendous damage, and small, fast ships that moved like schools of metal fish through space. The Zephyrian sensors, when they could function properly, through all the electronic warfare that was disrupting their systems, registered fleet numbers that should have been impossible for a species they had believed to be mythical. "This is impossible," Zixmore repeated, but his voice now carried the hollow tone of someone whose entire understanding of reality had just collapsed. "Our intelligence reports, our surveillance, there were only a few million humans at most. Your intelligence was exactly what we wanted you to see," Captain Soyon replied. "We've been controlling your information for years, showing you only the primitive settlements we wanted you to find, while hiding our true cities, our real population, our actual capabilities." Lieutenant Junghyun's voice joined the conversation, from his ship, the Indomitable. "You catalogued us as myths who supposedly conquered our world through stubbornness. You got that part right, at least. We are incredibly stubborn, especially when someone threatens our families." The human fleet took formation around the Zephyrian force, not attacking, but clearly demonstrating their overwhelming numerical superiority. For every Zephyrian ship, there were dozens of human vessels, all of them broadcasting those ancient, terrifying songs that awakened primal fears buried deep in Zephyrian DNA. Fleet Commander Zixmore looked out at the impossible sight surrounding his fleet and realized that everything his civilization believed about the galaxy had been wrong. They weren't the apex predators they thought they were. They had awakened something far older, far more dangerous, and far more clever than they had ever imagined possible. The sky above Earth hadn't just darkened with warships, it had darkened with the collective shadow of humanity's true reach throughout the galaxy, revealing a species that had turned their greatest weakness, being underestimated, into their most powerful weapon. And the Zephyrians were about to learn why that was a mistake no one made twice. Part 5. Overpowered vengeance with a smile. Expanded Prometheus didn't just win against the Zephyrian fleet. No, that would have been too simple, too boring. This artificial intelligence had something much better in mind. Something that would make the entire galaxy remember this day forever. The AI had been watching, learning, calculating for months. It knew exactly how to hit the Zephyrians where it would hurt the most. Not their ships, not their weapons, but their pride, their reputation, their entire sense of superiority that they had built over centuries of terrorizing other worlds. The probability manipulation began slowly. At first, it looked like simple technical difficulties. A targeting system here, a shield generator there. The Zephyrian commanders weren't worried. They had backup systems, redundancies, fail-safes. They were the most advanced military force in known space, after all. But then things got weird, really weird. Admiral Zekthor was standing on the bridge of their flagship, the Terror's Edge, when his weapons officer reported the first major malfunction. Their main plasma cannon had somehow recalibrated itself to fire soap bubbles. Not just any soap bubbles, but perfectly formed rainbow-colored ones that drifted lazily through space, catching the light from nearby stars. "Fix it!" Zekthor roared, his forearms gesturing wildly. "Fire the secondary batteries." The secondary weapons fired all right. They launched what appeared to be fireworks. Beautiful, colorful fireworks that exploded in brilliant patterns across the void. If this had been a celebration instead of a battle, it would have been spectacular. Instead, it was humiliating. Meanwhile, aboard the human ship Retribution, Admiral Minserk was trying very hard not to smile. His crew wasn't even bothering to hide their amusement. They could see everything happening to the Zephyrian fleet on their screens. "Prometheus," Minserk said quietly into his communicator. "Are you responsible for this?" "I have no idea what you mean, Admiral," came the AI's perfectly innocent reply. "I am simply observing these curious technical malfunctions affecting our enemies. How unfortunate for them." The malfunctions were getting worse by the minute. The Zephyrian shield generators had stopped producing actual defensive barriers. Instead, they were projecting three-dimensional holographic images of Earth animals. Puppies chased their tails around the Terror's edge. Kittens pounced on Invisible. Mice along the hull of the Vengeance Seeker. A particularly large projection of a golden retriever was wagging its tail so enthusiastically that it was interfering with sensor readings on 3 different ships. But perhaps the most devastating malfunction affected their communication systems. Every single Zephyrian ship was now broadcasting K-pop music at maximum volume. The haunting melodies and upbeat rhythms echoed across all frequencies, making it impossible for the fleet to coordinate. Worse yet, the music was being transmitted on open channels, meaning every other ship in the sector could hear it too. Commander Yunji, monitoring communications from the human fleet, was receiving frantic transmissions from merchant vessels and civilian ships throughout the system. Most were asking what the strange, catchy music was and where they could download it. "Admiral," she reported, barely containing her laughter, "we're getting requests for the Zephyrian playlist from 17 different cargo haulers and a cruise ship." This was when Prometheus revealed the true genius of its plan. While the Zephyrians were struggling with their malfunctioning equipment, the AI had been busy with something far more damaging. It had been recording everything. Every private communication, every strategic discussion, every casual conversation about their planned genocide of 47 different species. The recordings were crystal clear. Admiral Zekthor discussing how they would cleanse the galaxy of inferior races. Commander Vaxtine laughing about the creative ways they could torture prisoners. Ambassador Vextal explaining in detail how they would use human extinction as an example to other species. Prometheus didn't just record these conversations, it broadcast them, simultaneously, to every inhabited world within 100 light years. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Within the first hour, the Galactic Trade Consortium had frozen all Zephyrian assets. Within 2 hours, the Interstellar Peacekeeping Force had issued warrants for the arrest of every Zephyrian military officer above the rank of lieutenant. Within 3 hours, 47 different species had declared war on the Zephyrian Empire. But the social media response was perhaps even more brutal. Across thousands of worlds, beings were sharing clips of the Zephyrian recordings alongside footage of their fleet firing soap bubbles and surrounded by holographic puppies. The hashtag #ZephyrianFail was trending on 17 different social networks. A particularly popular meme showed Admiral Zekthor's serious face next to a picture of the rainbow soap bubbles with the caption, "When you try to conquer the galaxy, but end up running a children's birthday party instead." Ambassador Vextal found himself in the most uncomfortable position of his long life. He was sitting across from Admiral Minseok in a simple conference room aboard the Retribution. The human's face was calm, almost friendly, but his eyes held something that made Vextal's forearms tremble slightly. "Do you have exactly 2 choices?" Minseok explained, his voice conversational. "Choice 1, we hand you over to the representatives of the 47 species you plan to exterminate. I hear the Crystalline Collective has some particularly creative ideas about justice. The Flame Dancers want to discuss their traditional punishment methods with you personally. The Void Singers have composed a special funeral dirge just for your trial." Vaxtal's pale blue skin had turned an alarming shade of green. He had heard about the justice systems of those species. They were thorough, imaginative, and decidedly unpleasant. "Choice 2, he managed to croak. Commander Yunji stepped forward, placing a thick contract on the table between them. "You become Earth's cultural exchange ambassadors, all of you, every surviving member of your fleet." "Ambassadors?" Vextal's voice pitched higher. "What kind of ambassadors?" "The educational kind," Yunji explained with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You'll tour the galaxy, visit mixed-species audiences, explain to survivors of your planned genocide exactly why you thought wiping out entire civilizations was amusing. You'll participate in cultural exchange programs, diversity workshops, and sensitivity training sessions. You'll be very busy," Admiral Minseok added helpfully. "Booked solid for the next, 50 years minimum, maybe longer depending on how well you learn your lessons. And," Yunji continued, Every single appearance will be recorded and broadcast across the galaxy. Think of it as your chance to rebuild your species' reputation, one humiliating apology at a time. Prometheus's voice echoed through the room's speakers. I've already booked your first 17 appearances. The opening night is next week on Kepler 442b. Sold-out crowd of 3 million beings, mostly refugees from worlds you plan to destroy. They're very excited to meet you. 6 months later, the galaxy had a new favorite entertainment program. Zephyrians Learn Better had become the most watched show in broadcast history. Every week, former Zephyrian military officers would appear before different audiences to explain their former beliefs and apologize for their planned genocide. The format was simple but effective. A Zephyrian would take the stage, usually trembling, and attempt to explain their previous actions to an audience composed entirely of beings from species they had planned to exterminate. The audience was encouraged to ask questions, share their feelings, and provide educational feedback. Tonight's show was being broadcast live from the Galactic comedy circuit, and former Ambassador Vextal was the featured speaker. He stood on stage, his forearms shaking as he faced an audience of 3,000 beings representing 12 different species. So, we thought humans were myths, because, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. A crystalline collective. Member in the front row raised a translucent hand. Because you were too arrogant to do proper research. Because you assumed your intelligence was superior to everyone else's. Added a flame dancer from the middle section. Because you were idiots. Suggested a young being from the Verdant Gardens colony. Vextal nodded miserably. All of those things, we were incredibly stupid. Prometheus's voice echoed through the theater's sound system with perfect timing. Don't forget to mention the part where you plan to use human extinction as entertainment, Vextal. Our viewers love that bit. The audience erupted in laughter. Not cruel laughter, but the kind of laughter that comes from seeing justice served with a side of cosmic irony. They weren't laughing at humans this time. They were laughing at the beings who had underestimated humanity so completely. In the wings, Captain Dahyun watched the performance with satisfaction. She spoke quietly into her communicator. Mission accomplished. The galaxy's newest comedy act is ready for their next show. How's our booking schedule looking? Packed solid for the next decade, came the reply from her assistant. We've got requests from 43 different worlds. Apparently, watching former genocidal maniacs apologize while surrounded by holographic puppies never gets old. The show continued for another hour. Vextal answered questions about Zephyrian culture, explained their former belief system, and practiced what humans called active listening, as audience members shared how his species' plans had affected their lives. By the end of the evening, something remarkable had happened. The audience was still angry, still hurt by what the Zephyrians had planned. But they were also laughing, sharing stories, and beginning to heal. The former enemies had become the galaxy's most effective teachers about the dangers of prejudice and the importance of understanding other cultures. As the curtain fell, Vextal realized something that would have shocked his former self. He was actually starting to enjoy these performances. Not because they were easy, they were the hardest thing he had ever done, but because for the first time in his life, he was making a positive difference in the galaxy. Humans had indeed been myths to the Zephyrians, stories too good to be true, tales of a species too clever and too kind to actually exist. But while humanity had proven to be very real, the Zephyrians' dignity as a proud warrior race, that had become extinct for real, and somehow in the strangest twist of fate, both species were better off for it. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Never underestimate the species that invented both warfare and comedy. They just might. Turn your own arrogance into the best joke the universe has ever heard.